Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Paradigm Shifts podcast with your host, Keisha Kruger. I'm an organization development practitioner and executive coach, working with leaders to create positive changes in the workplace using behavioral science. My personal mission? Share science-based tools and leadership insights from the field that you can use in the workplace and beyond. Considering we spend about 3/4 of our lifetime at work, there is incredible science and organizational psychology that can be used to rethink the way we work, lead, and ultimately live. Join me as I speak with thought leaders and business leaders in practice, unpacking light bulb moments for paradigm shifts. Hey everyone! On this week's episode, we're chatting all things well-being, psychological safety, and belonging and inclusion in the workplace with Cassandra Corona. And if you haven't already hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do it right now. We've got some incredible guests coming up that you're not going to want to miss, such as the Cassandra who we're chatting with this week. And she is the CEO, Organizational Leadership Development Practitioner of Core Consulting Group, where she supports her clients with talent management, leadership development, team efficiency strategies, and so much more. Cassandra enjoys working as an external consultant, supporting organizations with workshops, strategies, and assessing culture. She often applies her research in working remotely and has first-hand expertise in small business development at her high-quality CBD boutique in Brookline, Massachusetts. For more information about Cassandra, be sure to visit the show notes. Hello, Cassie. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for creating this space and inviting me on.
Of course. I'm doing well. From one podcast host to the other, which we'll share more about that in a little bit. We have so much to cover today. We're going to talk about well-being, psych safety in the workplace, just a couple of different things. And I want to start here. Well-being. It has been, in my opinion, a more recent focus, at least in the last decade or so, a very prominent focus of leaders and organizations, and rightfully so. Employee well-being is a contributing factor to a lot of organizational dynamics, such as productivity, retention, morale, engagement. We can go on, right? So as a consultant for organizations, what can you tell us about the science of well-being in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, well-being in the workplace is such a multi-dimensional construct. And so when we look at it from a very high stance, we're looking at different layers, right? But when we think about it from the idea of the science, just neurologically speaking, we know that if an individual is working in an organization where they don't feel psychologically safe, or even if they have poor leadership, poor management, there's high doses of cortisol, which will inhibit them from producing the performance that we were looking for within an organization. So when we look at the science behind individuals feeling safe and being able to be their authentic self in an organization, and also receiving all those different factors from that multidimensional idea of workplace flexibility, career, financial, community, all of these different factors, if we look at that, and then if we think that we can meet that employee there in some way or form, we're going to be more apt to have an employee that potentially will stay longer and reduce the turnover. So there's just so much science when it comes to just the brain and being safe, and also being their needs being met within an organization, that we just need to take a pause to really dig deep into the questions of what are we doing and how are we really promoting well-being within an organization, and not just checking the box.
Uh, So that's why I love our field, because there are people like you and myself and other OD practitioners and org psychologists that are out there helping organizations come to realize the importance of well-being for their employees. And yes, at the end of the day, our goal for our business is to, be profitable. But in order to do that, there are some other things that we need to consider. And well-being doesn't usually come up as the first thing that a leader or an organization generally thinks about. But it is probably one of the most powerful contributors to an employee driving productivity, right? One of the things I want to lean in here on that you said was showing up as your authentic self. How does that show up in the workplace? Can we do that outside of our home lives? Because I hear that often. It's like, oh, I'm going to show up one way in the workplace and then, a separate person on the side.
Yeah, I feel like that is just huge. I have spoken to a couple different organizations in the last couple of months and speaking to their HR VPs or just their recruitment groups that are like trying to target and recruit talent. They are being asked more than ever by employees, what is their culture of their organization? And they're like, what is this question? Why are so many people coming in and asking us what our culture is? She's like, I one of my clients specifically told me, I can't tell, like, name how many times or put a number to it, how many times people are coming into interviews asking about our culture. And so that's just showing you what the workforce looks like right now. They are so interested in learning about how they can show up in the organization. What kind of community do you have in your organization? What is their career going to look like? What is the financial aspect going to look like? Um, so, what they're really asking for when they say, what is your organizational culture? Or what's the culture of your organization, however they frame the question, they're really asking you for your emotional well being, the employee's well being, should I say. Like, what am I going to be investing in, and what are you going to be giving me? So, this whole idea of culture, I think Peter Drucker said it, culture will eat strategy for breakfast, right? So, we need to be focusing on our culture. And when we think about culture, it's not just a one size like fits all. It's actually thinking about the employee's well being. Um, so psychological safety, in essence, and I like to just dumb it down. It's just being able to just show up and be you, and like not have any negative connotations associated with maybe your background or even any positive connotations, just no assumptions, just being you and walking into a room and maybe asking a question that you should know the answer to, but not feeling like you are going to be attacked by your coworkers, but more supported. Creating an environment. I mean, there's so, like I said earlier, it's a multi-dimensional construct that really encompasses the physical aspect of the human, the career aspects, the financial, we're talking about social, community, and also purpose driven. Like, what is the purpose? Like, where are their values? Are they aligned with the organization? So, when we think about psychological safety, we're thinking about the individual coming into the organization and feeling like they can be their authentic self.
Yeah, so employees are contributing to when it comes to selecting the environments that they're going to be placing themselves in. They are having more of a say, right? More of a voice. They're taking notice of being maybe boundaries, right? Which I hear a lot about boundaries and making sure you're in the right places with the right people. It's almost like employees are demanding that for themselves now. And you're right. The question they're asking is, can I be myself in this environment? Can I show up as who I truly am? And that allows me to have an aligned and regulated nervous system. For example, we're not coming into work feeling like we're walking on eggshells. If you're experiencing that in your workplace, that's a really telltale sign that you're not in the right place that's aligned with your nervous system, right? And also that it's a psychologically safe environment. So it sounds like organizations then, if they want to attract quality candidates who are the right culture add, and also where candidates feel like they're the right fit, they need to be really good at showing what the culture looks like. And what are some ways that leaders or hiring managers can share examples of what that culture is like in a really tangible way, um, so the employee can really see themselves in that environment?
Some ways is through their hiring process, being very thoughtful of how they are interviewing. What does that interview process look like? I mean, if you're going to be interviewing, and whether it's a screening call to the formal interview, is just being very mindful that the way you handle that screening call, the way that you handle the interview is demonstrating what the culture looks like. So now if it's extremely corporate and you're handling everything extremely corporate, you're only going to attract individuals that are extremely type A. But if you're a little bit more open and you have that fluidity within your your screening process and your formal interview process, people are able to really read between the lines and understand, like, oh, this is another human on the other side, and I'm feeling heard and I'm feeling respected just in this interview. It starts from the beginning process of screening and then interviewing. So when you're able to just emulate that psychological safety just from a screening call to then a formal interview to then whether you're doing different various interviews, making sure that it's all strategically aligned to really, really demonstrate psychological safety. Um, some tangible things to do, though, I mean, is having other employees a part of the hiring process, to be there to answer questions and to also scaffold and support other newcomers in the onboarding process to show there is that community. Other things that you can do too is when you're going through that process is to share what you're doing. How do you, like, what are the developmental plans for employees when it comes to well-being goals? So perhaps, do they have any recognition for employees? Are they looking to, how do they develop employees? Like, what are a lot of questions that employees are asking too is like, how am I going to improve my career? Like, what are you going to do to help me to propel me and to give me that learning experience that I'm also interested in. I mean, there's just so many different questions and different ways that you can demonstrate psychological safety and also a culture to a potential candidates. Um, yeah.
I love that. And one of the things that you mentioned briefly was around values. And I've seen organizations do this really well, where they will bring examples to the surface around their values and give the employee an opportunity to share their values as well in that interview space. So if knowledge is a value for your organization or social responsibility, what is your company doing to uphold those values, right? Because that integrity is likely going to resonate with the right candidate if you're doing what you say you're doing. It's not just a poster on the wall, right? And I'm sure you're seeing this as well. So I want to go back to wellness and well-being. And there are so many aspects, as you were kind of listing them off, of well-being. What do you feel organizations are missing in this space?
So one thing that I really believe that we're missing, and this is just based off of talking to different individuals and different across different organizations. So from medical to tech to marketing to, I mean, you name it. I've talked to different, and what I'm hearing across the board is this lack of family friendly opportunities to embrace community and social within their organization. So there's a lot of like opportunity for happy hours, and to bring forward like this camaraderie within the organization of social, maybe even drinking. But we're like forgetting about the individuals that were in the home for 2 years in pandemic, stuck with their family and embrace those new skills of being within their family dynamic, essentially, because they were working so much. Now they're home, thinking about that, like bringing them back into the workforce to now say, like, let's just spend an extra hour together rather than not thinking about the family construct of like, maybe we could do something different, like have a family Saturday or a family day on a Friday and come together and have all these different ice cream trucks for the kids, and everybody brings their kids and families, which is a really great opportunity. So family friendly opportunities is one that I would say, to embrace community and the social aspect of the emotional well-being or the employee's well-being. Another one that's really near and dear to my heart is sober curious support, and employee engagement opportunities that are fostering sober curious opportunities. So perhaps it's just having conversations about individuals that are maybe refraining from alcohol. We've seen an uptick in employees actually refraining from alcohol, and what are organizations doing to support that is the question. I've had people that I've known that have refrained from alcohol for the last 2.5 years during the pandemic, and they go back to a workplace event and there's only beer or wine being served, not even mocktails or anything else. So they feel like they have to conform to their colleagues essentially. And then there's the question of why you're not drinking. So if we can, as an organization, think about the wellness, the well-being of our employees, and making sure that we're keeping top of mind the individuals that are sober. I think there was a statistic that I just read recently that said about 20% of adults are now into a sober curious mindset. And I think that goes hand in hand when we think about wellness, right? And a lot of people are now being more mindful of what they're consuming. There's more opportunity to really determine what you want to eat that's going to fuel your body and how it's going to make you feel the next day. And it's the same thing, same correlation with alcohol. If we're going to consume alcohol tonight, we cannot expect our employees to perform at the best level tomorrow. So there's just being very strategic and understanding that not all employees are interested in drinking alcohol, and how are we supporting them?
These are such powerful shifts, paradigm shifts, if you will, in organizations. I'm so glad that you are recognizing and bringing that to the surface. I want to unpack this a little bit. That first one about lack of friendly family opportunities for social inclusion and embracing more of like a community type atmosphere. I'm seeing this now. Until you kind of pointed it out, I wasn't really like putting a label or a name on it. But now that you brought it to the surface, the forefront, you're absolutely right. We've spent so many years, 2 years, right, kind of rebuilding those family dynamics. And now that's a part of our lifestyles. And to go back to work and almost like take that apart, it's not going to work. Organizations do need to be mindful of how to bring the family dynamic into it. I've also seen employees try, like when there's like retreats or different, employee events, that they're trying to race home to their family earlier. They're leaving earlier, where maybe organizations and team leaders can be more mindful about creating those spaces where the whole family can join and not just that employee. And I think that's so powerful, of a paradigm shift to bring into this space that maybe others listening aren't really thinking about. And then that second one, unpacking that one is going to be awesome because I think I've shared with you, I've personally been on a sober curious journey that turned into a completely sober lifestyle. And it's been about 3 years for me that I haven't drank. And really it was all about wellness, and it just, drinking for me was not, it was in conflict with the lifestyle I wanted to live in terms of my well-being and my personal decisions. And I absolutely notice when there are events in the workplace that are as inclusive of those who are refraining from alcohol, or who are being a little bit more mindful of their well-being or their health, for example. So talk to me about that. Are you seeing organizations be more mindful of these two areas, or do you think we still have so much more work to do?
As of right now, there's a lot of work to do. And that's where I can come in and help, because there is this need to understand how to bring these conversations to the forefront without feeling like there's a boundary being crossed, right? Like people don't want to make any assumptions about their employees. They don't want to make assumptions about executives or even higher up CEOs. Perhaps there's some type of liquor and abuse, right? Liquor abuse or some alcoholism. But the idea is if we bring it to the forefront and normalize, hey, this doesn't necessarily, there's a large spectrum of why people stop drinking. And we have something just as simple as wellness, the opportunity to be more connected to oneself. There was no real problem internally of why we wanted to stop drinking. We just stopped drinking and we knew that that was something that we couldn't do anymore, right? Or there's the other aspect of this is becoming unmanageable and I'm actually harming my career's growth, my organization's growth. I'm hindering myself, my family. And so there's different spectrums, right? There's a whole spectrum of it. So just being able to speak about it in a free way, and the way you could do that is fostering opportunities to share, having safe spaces, and having an organizational psychologist on staff to work through those challenging opportunities within the organizations, or just be able to communicate with different colleagues, and understanding where they're at and how we can support them so that they can continue to show up as their authentic self. Um, I think that there's just so much opportunity. And right now, where we're at, there's just growth. There's opportunity to grow and to support family values and a lifestyle that doesn't have to romanticize alcohol. I mean, if we look at the 1950s, 60s, 70s, there was just this romanticism in the organizations, right? People would have afternoon whiskey shots. Look at Mad Men. It was romanticized. Alcohol was romanticized. And you worked a really long week. You get to have a cocktail with your colleagues at the end of the day. And there's so many other ways that we can really create that community, that employee, that emotional well-being within an organization that will really allow people to be aligned with the organization and stay. Because we do know that about $322 billion is lost with turnover and lost productivity globally due to employee burnout.
Did you
So,
say $320 billion? Did I hear that correct?
yes, I got that from a stat from Gallup, which does.
Wow.
So if we are being mindful of how do we really hone in on this employee wellness, well-being experience, there's every organization has a budget for it because we want to retain our employees. And so just being mindful that not everything has to be a beer cart. Not everything has to be a sports game or a fancy dinner spending it all on wine. It could be a family. There's different modalities to really encompass this.
Good. And you mentioned normalizing these conversations, and I imagine that it's already so difficult because there is such stigma associated with talking about either being sober or on a sober curious journey. And I imagine that this is not a conversation that's going to come up when you're in a team atmosphere or necessarily one-on-one with your boss, unless you have that psychologically safe environment. But even still, it is a difficult conversation or a difficult thing to say. From my own personal experience, when I first started to become sober curious, I got more questions around why I wasn't drinking than why I was, right? And I thought that was kind of interesting observation to make. So it almost was like when I brought that into the workplace, it was an abnormal thing, right? It was not, oh, this isn't normal. This isn't the way that we do things or the way we operate around here. So what can leaders do to help break down that stigma in the workplace and create more of an environment where those who want to bring that into the atmosphere, or those who want to share those things or feel more included, they are sharing it to feel more included in certain events? How can they do that?
Well, when we think about that, all the different pillars for creating a workplace, a culture that encompasses employees' well-being, right? We're thinking about the social, the community, we're thinking about career, financial. One thing that I'm thinking personally is creating that community around um, physical well-being, and perhaps even having some type of challenge, like how long can someone go without booze, and doing some type of incentivize. So it's like a participation of like, hey, we're refraining from alcohol as an organization for the month of October. How many of us could sustain that? And kind of just really glamorizing this opportunity to have that drive and that willpower. I mean, we know that when we look at top down, right? We look at the top, these people are extremely disciplined. We're looking at people that have really maintained a strong, solid core of who they are and their values. Now, if we can value just health and wellness and recognize that alcohol is not health and wellness,
Uh-huh.
and that's one of our values as an organization, is to promote psychological safety and to promote community, then create an opportunity amongst your employees to say, like, hey, let's do dry October, or whatever, dry January, and see how long we could sustain that.
Mhm.
So creating opportunities to normalize this conversation. Also, just potentially even having a safe space where it's just sober, curious discussion,
Sure.
right? Like a sober, curious evening. Like, well, let's come together and let's have one of the most people that we don't even know is sober talk about their journey, and in a way that's not going to maybe harm that person completely, but just allow them to show up authentically. And I will tell you, I agree with you. After I told people I was sober, and when I started talking about my sobriety, because I've been sober for almost 4.5 years now,
Congratulations.
thank you. It was very challenging, but there's something so empowering and so uplifting and so disciplined. And I probably perform at such a higher level now because of my sobriety. So if we
Mhm.
can create that and show the correlation between the two, I think it could be really powerful for organizations to allow people to just show up. And I know people right now that are in high levels seats that are sober and they cannot talk about it because there's a fear of what people might think. And now, if we could just normalize it by just bringing it to the forefront, hey, let's all challenge each other. Let's see how long we can go. Or let's do a sober, curious meeting for anyone that is interested. Share the stats about over 20% of adults right now are sober curious. Is anyone in the organization sober curious? Should we have a sober curious discussion?
Yes. Wow. Yes, absolutely. And what I want to point out here for those listening is that we're not saying if you drink that you're bad or that this is not something that you should be doing. What we're saying is, what I'm saying is, and Cassie, if you have a different opinion, is if you are a leader of a team or an organization, the environment and the spaces that you create for your employees need to be more inclusive of those who don't drink, right? Those who are more sober curious or who are experimenting with their sober journey, so that it does build that foundation of psych safety and trust within the organization. Is that what we're saying here?
I would say that too. And I'd like to add that this is not necessarily just about substance abuse, this is a cultural thing too.
Yeah.
There is individuals that are culturally, alcohol is not a part of their culture and has never been. And so when they go to these events, and they're, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion here too. We're talking
Yes.
about the individuals that their culture never romanticized alcohol, but then they go and they idolize their leader, and then their leader is just drinking. And I mean, we can take this a whole step further. How many cases are happening in organizations, sexual harassment, or these very, very touchy topics because of alcohol consumption? Can we limit that?
Mm. I wonder what we could do with that, what correlation that would cause to have more of those normalized discussions on the sexual harassment cases that I'm sure HR is seeing, right, or have seen over over time. So you're absolutely right. I think this is such an important conversation. Sensitive, but it's important. And so that's why we do what we do, is because we have to step into those spaces, into the arena, being brave, and be a light for others to show up and also do the same. I want to talk to you about top ways that leaders can cultivate psychological safe environments in the workplace. We've touched a little bit on some, but if I'm listening right now and I'm saying, Cassie, I hear you, I resonate with what you're saying. Now, what do I need to go out and do today? What's your response?
First thing is vulnerable. Being vulnerable to share your mistakes. So one of the best things that I see is when a leader makes a mistake and they are able to identify it and share it, and then learn from it and ask for support. Like, when a leader asks for support, they're like showing that it's okay to ask for help. Now, I can also see the other side of that coin too. How can I, as a leader, be asking for help? I just held
Right.
a seminar on the importance of asking for help and how important it is, based off of creating that camaraderie, also how important it is for other people to feel like they're helping. We know that when you help someone, that it creates this very big like energy change of positivity, helping. So asking for help is a really great way to um, essentially show and demonstrate and broadcast your psychological safety of like your own ability to be vulnerable and ask for help. Being vulnerable is being able to share your experiences within the organization, your challenges, how you learn from them, and then asking for opportunities to grow with that. Like, where did anyone else see like where my blind spot was? Something as
Both.
simple of just seeing where like, giving people other people not it's not a psychological game either. Not like let me just act like I'm unaware just so that I can gain their trust, but being completely honest. I mean, when I had a brick and mortar, when I opened up that store, I was making some terrible mistakes. And when I was hiring employees, I would share my mistakes and they would start laughing and it would just break the ice to let them know like mistakes happen and it's
Mhm.
okay, but we have to learn from them. And I'm only sharing this with you because you're going to make a mistake. And when you do, I want you to share them with me because at the end of the day, I'm not going to reprimand you. I'm just going to learn from them, learn from that mistake with you.
Ugh.
And creating that like very powerful ability to share mistakes. How do we learn from them? And psychological safety is also just communicating in a nonviolent manner. So maybe looking into nonviolent communication workshops to learn how to communicate in a way that doesn't create that internal um, fear or judgment that the person won't hear any words that could trigger them, but more so of that collaborative language. So just being very intentional on how you speak. Psychological safety is also when you're doing that hiring process and you're bringing them in is just emulating that psychological safety. And how do you do that is when you're interviewing, just saying, I know how anxious you might be because there's 5 of us here talking to you or interviewing you, but we're here just because we want to get to know you and we think you're great. Like framing conversations in a positive way so that people can feel safe.
Ugh.
If that makes sense.
That's huge. Okay, so just to recap, we heard be vulnerable, ask for help or be willing to ask for help, and then communicating in a nonviolent way and framing things in a positive way as well. So all of those are kind of like humanizing our human experience in the workplace because we are humans. So that's what we should be doing. I want to talk a little bit about the communicating in a nonviolent way. Does that mean when we communicate, I am not using the wrong or inappropriate tone, that maybe my nonverbals are aligned with what I'm saying, so I'm not causing inconsistency or dissonance, cognitive dissonance with my employees? Is that kind of what I'm understanding for that?
Yes, absolutely. And assuming positive intention in all ways.
Okay.
So the assuming of positive intention is extremely important. Thinking about when you do speak to someone, are you using the right words? Because we know that when someone's speaking, you're only hearing 20% of what they're actually saying. So being very, very specific on the words you're utilizing so that when that person's picking up what you're putting down, it doesn't come off as if you're attacking them. And we do that with feedback, the right way how we handle feedback. And we do that with when we're having conversations with our family or friends. How are we taking the information that we know and then being able to share that with others in a way that's not going to put this like barrier between you and them? It's a very tactful skill. So there's obviously emotionally intelligence that goes into nonviolent communication. Just being able to share your awareness of how you are feeling, but also being able to allow people to hold that space too.
Yeah, and these are all skills that anyone can learn, right?
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. I always say that these are skills that you might not be born with, but if you strengthen that brain muscle, you can and will succeed and grow and learn.
Yeah, I feel like it comes down to like having a willingness or a desire to learn and being open to building your self-awareness, which we talk a lot about on the podcast. Self-awareness is like the foundation, right? And one of the things that I wanted to also touch upon with all of these top things, these 4 ways that you can start to build psychological safety within your teams that you can put into practice. It's it it might be that you're waiting for someone else to show up in this way. It might be that some other leader isn't doing it. That doesn't mean that you don't have the invitation to do it and to stand up in this role yourself and be the role model, be that North Star for the organization that does show up in a way that carries effective leadership traits and characteristics out, is that ripple effect is important. And people are watching you if you're in a leader position. I always talk about the responsibility and accountability that leaders and managers have to be effective leaders, to be out there learning and growing. And if you're not learning and you're not growing, then are you actually living, right? So I just think that it's so important to remember that you can do this. If there's no one else doing it, you still don't have to wait for an invitation. Just do it.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we circle back to on the psychological safety aspect of what we're talking about right here is creating that environment where there's opportunity to learn always and learn from each other, learn like how do we celebrate wins and how do we celebrate learning opportunities. Question that you can ask yourself and your teams at the end of your meetings is how are we celebrating our wins and how are we celebrating this learning opportunity. But also just knowing psychological safety is cultural too, because if you are going in as a leader and you're being extremely vulnerable, but your team is extremely diverse and they're not used to a leader being so vulnerable, it's creating that premise of this is why I'm being vulnerable and sharing it. I want you to know that I'm sharing my experience because I want you to know that it's okay. Not because I'm weak or because I want you to perceive me as weak or because we're weak as a team, but because this is how we're going to develop. So really starting with that why, like Simon Sinek says, right? Like start with the why of why you're holding that container in such a manner so that people can receive it the correct way, properly. So even when you're doing your interviewing and your screening, you're saying the reason why we host our interviews in this very specific manner because we really do believe in psychological safety and we believe in creating an environment that is welcoming and has the opportunity for growth, so that when you do have these conversations that are channeled by vulnerability and nonviolent communication, people are not taking it as in, wow, this leader, I don't know why, because there are some subordinates that are looking for leadership and there's different leadership styles, as I've learned, right? We know that there's different leadership styles and not everyone needs the same kind of leader, but we do know that when a leader could be compassionate, flexible, supportive, also have the ability to be vulnerable, we're going to have a higher retention rate. It's just it's just going to be more impactful for that team dynamic.
Yeah, and I actually feel like vulnerability is not weak. It takes strength and courage to do that, to own up to things that may be mistakes that you've made, right? That takes a lot of courage. And you were mentioning that as an example. I think that's such a great way to model it, that if you want to build a psychologically safe team, which, accepts risk at some level, that you have to be able to showcase that you are willing to fail a little bit yourself. And also, what do you do once you've failed, right? It's like you've taken the mistake, you've taken what you've learned, and now you're going to take that learning, that lesson learned, and you're going to apply it moving forward so we don't make the same mistakes again. But in an environment where it's like, oh, mistakes are not allowed, my goodness, that like sets you up for so much more failure.
Yeah. I had a client recently which had a really serious medical risk with one of their clients. And the way that the management held the problem had that person so shaken up. And I had to remind them that even though you are a subordinate, even though you are a technician in this organization, and you could still be model leadership by taking responsibility, and you could still share with your team the mistake you had made. But if you don't feel safe talking about the mistake you had, that shows your leadership. Like I was trying to play with this client to let them know, like, you made a mistake and it's okay. But I realized that it's not my role to tell them that it's okay unless their leadership is saying it's okay to make a mistake.
Right.
So, and then I had let them know, like, you are able to take on a leadership role by talking to your leadership and saying, hey, I made a mistake and I want to share this with my colleagues. And I want to be able to demonstrate that this will never happen again in a way that's tactful.
There's so much goodness in that discussion alone, like showing up in personal leadership and how you don't need a title to be a leader, that you can be a leader in your own right, even as an individual contributor. It's so powerful. Thank you for surfacing that. Well, I have one final question for you as we wrap up here, and it is, what is the most recent paradigm shift that you've experienced?
Good question. If I'm going to say it's just this whole new way of being within organizations and desiring a culture that is really going to propel them and also create that psychological safe space that we're talking about, which is the culture of emotional and mental well-being. So I see that there's a shift, a need, should I say, like, so to speak, there's a need for that. So that's what I'm seeing as a paradigm shift. And traditionally, or it's almost like you show up, you compartmentalize, works here, plays here, families here. And now the paradigm shift is organizations are now having to fill all those gaps. And so when we think about that, we're thinking about the career well-being, we're thinking about social, financial, physical, and then also community. So think about that if you're a leader, if you're within an organization. And like we said, you don't have to have the title of leadership, but you could be your own personal leader and be that North Star, as you put it, to your colleagues and create those opportunities for challenging well-being and challenging the status quo within organizations to be more community focused. And
so powerful. I can only imagine where the culture of workplaces will be 10 years down the road, because we're having discussions and conversations like this now. And I want to thank you for being so vulnerable on this episode and sharing with us a little bit about how we are normalizing conversations around sobriety and sober curious journeys. I think that is so important. And also sharing with us the trends that you're noticing in organizations around being more inclusive of family and community type events. So I think this is going to be really helpful for shifting paradigms out there. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was so much fun. I feel like we could talk for hours. So
I know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a review, rate, and subscribe wherever you're listening. If you know a business leader in practice or friend who you think would be interested in this episode, please consider sharing it with them. I am so grateful for your support. For more updates, you can follow us at Paradigm Shifts Podcast on Instagram. See you on the next episode.